you by KPI and Sapiens. Today's topic is a panel of real-world experience with the decision model by practitioners across industries, and I may also say across continents. The first two installments of this webinar series were on October 18th, part 1, where Barbara introduced the decision model and recent advances in the area. We have this webinar recorded and it's available through our webpage. The second one was an introduction to business decision management software and live demonstration of Sapiens Decision by Thomas Rulewicz and Gil Siegel. This presentation is currently not available, but we will make it available soon. And today we have our panel of the real-world experience with the decision model by practitioners, and we make this also available as a recording. My name is Michael Gross, and I have the pleasure to introduce you to one of the co-inventors and co-authors of the book, The Decision Model, a Business Logic Framework Linking Technology and Business and Technology, Barbara von Halle. She is also managing partner at Knowledge Partners International. Barbara, thank you and welcome to our webinar series today.
Thank you, Michael. And we are going to be introducing the 4 different panelists that we have today. And all of them have real-world experience on real projects creating decision models. And we selected this particular group of panelists because their experiences vary widely. And we have someone who approached decision models as an analysis deliverable. We have people who have actually automated decision models in more than one technology, sometimes taking the same decision model and automating it in different business rule engines or a homegrown engine, etc. And some of them have done very large decision models, and some have been very simple. And they also have sold the decision model, some of them from the bottom up in an organization, and some from the top down. So we picked these 4 special people because they each have a unique story to tell. And it's sort of just the beginning of the world of the decision model in terms of being spread worldwide. And so with that, I'd like to ask each one of them to just give you a little bit of a background in terms of what their background is prior to the decision model. So if we can turn it over to Nick.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Barbara. So my name's Nick Broom. I'm currently a contract business analyst working with Aviva UK Life, based out of York in the UK. So I've been in analysis for just over 10 years, done a lot around business process management, and I've basically been using, or I've been interested in and investigating the uses of the decision model for round about a year now, and it's my current assignment that's really allowed to explore it in a lot more detail. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nick. And David Peterson, can you tell us something about your experience?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Barbara. My name is David Peterson, and my background prior to the decision model is I have lots of experience in both IT and business. In IT, I have got lots of experience in architecting, building, and designing systems from small to very large. I have, on the business side, I have experience in designing businesses, business architecture, financial systems, and lots of business process of experience, and now decision modeling experience.
Alrighty, and then we will go on to Gil Siegel, who has yet a different background. Gil?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Barbara. My name is Gil Siegel. I am the Director of Enterprise Solutions at Sapiens Americas, based in Cary, North Carolina. I'm also the lead subject matter expert on Sapiens Decision, which was presented in webinar number 2 in this series. Decision, for those of you who missed that webinar, is our enterprise-level business decision management system. I have over 20 years experience working with business rules and business decisions.
Okay, thank you, Gil. And then Ravi comes to us as one of the first people we've ever certified in the decision model. We do have a certification process where a person goes through the training and then works on a project for 3 to 6 months, and then they take a written test, and then they do an oral dissertation where they defend a decision model that they've done in the real world, along with its impact on the business. And I'm very proud to say Ravi was one of the first folks to actually get certified, and I believe he's also a certified decision model trainer. So Ravi, with that, can you tell us a little bit about your experience before we met you?
Thank you, Barbara, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Ravi Singh, and I have been in business rules space for over 12, 13 years. And my experience varies from strictly IT to now to the business process, business operations. And now I am a director of Decision Model Governance Group, newly formed group, and this is where our responsibilities are to ensure that decision model projects and the decision models are compliant, and as well as there is governance and controlled governance and change management process.
Okay, and so what we've done now that you've been introduced to the 4 panelists, each of which has a different background, we are going to ask them 5 questions related to their experience with the decision model, and these questions are aimed at showing you the breadth and depth of the types of things that people have been successful doing with the decision model. So we will move on to the first question. And the first question is we will ask each panelist to explain their particular experience with the decision model. And if we go to the next page, we will start with Nick.
Okay, so as far as my use of the decision model goes, so I mentioned that I've had a background in business process management, and I first became aware of the decision model through my use of BPMN and following Bruce Silver's blog, which effectively related the two concepts. Barbara mentioned right at the start that there's obviously a series of different angles that the various panelists have come at the decision model from, and mine is really the bottom-up initiative. So effectively, it's not a director-led initiative in terms of my work with Aviva at the moment. So I introduced the use of the decision model on one particular investment bond project within Aviva. So I didn't so much do it as a big bang launch. Effectively, there was no real fanfare around it. The way that I actually tried to do it was to use it as a replacement for an existing business rules work product template and effectively see what sort of feedback I was getting on it. So effectively developing the decision model for this particular project, working with the business users, effectively introducing the different concepts in the various principles of the decision model as the work went along. So really, for me, it was a case of actually trying out the decision model to see if I really bought into it, in addition to seeing what other people got out of it. So that was really well received, and as a result of the success of that, I sort of more actively promoted the use of it within the finance and actuarial modelling environment. So the first project, the bond project, was very much a customer-facing piece of work. The second project, or rather the program that I'm part of, is looking more at the, I suppose, the after effects and also the looking forward of the various products sold. So it's effectively what reserves does the company need to keep so that it can actually cover the cost of things like guarantees on products. And effectively the business problem was there wasn't a great deal of understanding of the data that was processed through the actuarial environment. So was there a particular technique or recommendation that I could make that might articulate and provide that understanding in a better way than was currently being produced? So effectively I proposed this as a concept, basically ran a small pilot, basically just looking at a few fact types and actually looking at what the rule families look like, ran that past both business stakeholders and IT to effectively gain agreement to its use more widely on that program. And again, that was very well received. And so that's currently a work in progress. In addition to that, as a result of the successes that we've seen so far, I'm engaged in other initiatives to actually try and promote the wider usage of the decision model by engaging with the business analysis practice that exists within UK Life, plus engaging with the architecture community as well. So it's still very much a bottom-up led initiative. You know, there's not a great deal of visibility yet, and it's primarily me pushing it, basically trying to find like-minded people to really get excited about it and effectively create something that might have a bit of, I suppose, self-sustenance behind it, and really try and generate that enthusiasm. So that's basically broadly where I've been from and to with the decision model to date.
Thank you, Nick. I think we find that your experience is pretty similar to lots of people. A lot of people learn about the decision model from IIBA meetings or reading some of our columns. And what we're hoping is some of these webinars that we make available as links on the website will be a way that people can also introduce the decision model into their organizations, especially when they're doing, or whether they're doing a bottom-up sell or a top-down. But now we move on to the next person would be Dave Peterson. Dave, I've known Dave for many years, so I know that he has a lot of experience with decision models. So Dave, why don't you summarize your experience for us?
Thank you, Barbara. I got started with the decision model back when I was a director at Ernst & Young, and I was responsible for improving or re-engineering 9 processes across 130 countries. And we were re-engineering a process where we had a lot of, a very significant amount of regulations, independence, conflicts, internal policies, and so forth. And we worked on that project for, a good year and a half or so, and we realized that our business logic was getting lost. It was not only getting lost, it was getting misinterpreted. We were having difficulties with how the analysts were documenting the business logic, and we also found that once we handed over our business logic to IT, that they interpreted it differently, and the results were often different than what we intended. And so with this project, it was a great project because I did the project, started it without the decision model, and then finished it with the decision model, and we were able to measure the differences, very specific differences, with some hard numbers as to the improvements that we had. But when our logic started getting lost and we were having trouble with business logic conflicting, and we would make a change in one part of the process and we forget to make a change in the other part of the process, I ran into Larry at a seminar and got introduced to the decision model, and we were able to implement the decision model in that project. And we had some very dramatic improvements in the quality of the software, in the logic, but we also were able to improve the ability for us to test the logic. One of the things that I found in that project is that as probably most of you experience with all your projects, and I can say it with all my projects, is that testing business logic is very difficult. Yeah, and it's not impossible, and the decision model made that possible. Since then, I have my experience has varied from a variety of industries, from insurance industry to healthcare to manufacturing and financial services. I've done projects where we specifically we use the decision model and combination of decision modeling and re-engineering processes. Projects where we just did decision modeling, and that was all that we did. And other projects where we combine decision modeling with building requirements for a new system, including process. So that in a nutshell is my experience, and I've been very fortunate to be able to be part of taking the decision model and helping advance it with views. That has just been very, very powerful in my practice, is the ability to use decision model views, and other aspects in the area of data quality. My experience, I've been able, very fortunate to be kind of on the forefront of that, where we've used the decision model to do data quality decisions. And so, in a nutshell, that's my experience.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I knew there was a lot of experience to go through there. We'll now move on to Gil, because he comes to it from a software perspective. And we've also known Gil for a long time. So Gil, give us a summary of your experience with the decision model.
Sure. So as Barbara was just saying, my experience with the decision model is rather different than the other panelists here with us today. I come at it not so much from the decision modeling side, but more from the side of building a technology to support the decision modelers, so people like Nick and Ravi and David, helping them do their jobs. But actually, more interesting than that, my first exposure to the decision model was very early on. I was fortunate enough to have crossed paths with Barbara and Larry several times in my career. And so when they asked me to review early drafts of the book, I was delighted to help out, and was really impressed with what I read. And so that was my first exposure to the decision model. And then a while later, when an opportunity came our way to build out the technology to support the decision model, I seized on that opportunity and sold it internally within our organization, within Sapiens. And so here we are almost 2 years later, and we have a wonderful product, Decision, now in production, and it incorporates all of the stuff that you can see in the book, plus some newer stuff that David was just mentioning, views, so things like views, federated glossaries, governance, and lots of advanced methodologies, truly the latest methodologies related to the decision model. So that's a product, and my experience has been in helping glean the requirements for the product and helping build it out and review it and develop it. More recently than that, I've had the opportunity to actually take that product and use it in customer engagements. And so I'm now switching over to somewhat of a modeler hat and been able to implement the decision model in the real world. And we'll talk more about that later in the panel.
Thank you, Gil. And then we'll talk to Ravi, who actually comes from an organization where the decision model was piloted and then sold from the top down in the organization. And as you already heard, Ravi is part of a centralized group for decision model governance. So we would say they're a very mature organization in terms of the decision model. But I'll turn it over to Ravi and ask him to summarize his experience with it.
Thank you, Barbara. So we were looking at a business problem 3 years back, is to how to basically increase the enforcement of our policy at the time of loan delivery. So as I said, I work for Freddie Mac, and we basically securitize and guarantee or securitize 20–30% of the U.S. mortgages. So our credit policy is very comprehensive. Our data quality requirements are very comprehensive, and we have to enforce those before we purchase loans. So we're looking at how to manage it in our legacy systems or our old systems. We used to have roughly 2,000 rules, and it was very hard to analyze and also look at the conflicts and the overlaps between the rules. Another challenge we had was it was difficult for analysts to come back with sort of same business rules for the same requirement. So there was inconsistency in the analysis, capture, and creation of business rules. So we're looking for a comprehensive solution which will help us go from roughly 2,000–3,000 rules to 20–30,000 rules, because we had wanted to enforce everything from our policy and as well as we had a big change in our data side, and we wanted to capture more data. So we looked at several methodologies, and we couldn't find anything which was better than the decision model solution. And we started looking at is like the big things for us was the ability, the reuse it provides, and the second was the consistency in the interpretation, and then the third piece was like IT was able to consume it as it is. So as David described, I think Gil went over it. There is a concept of decision views where we can basically customize the rules specifically for the sellers. We can define it at the policy level and then customize for the sellers, customize it for the group of sellers. All those capabilities were sort of introduced as part of the decision modeling. So we looked at how we did that project, and it's still in the progress, and it will be going live early next year. And we also did several other projects where we used this decision modeling, and so from that experience, it's been going great. Also, we realized that to capture all these business rules and the logic, we needed a comprehensive system, or a system which can provide us the governance and change management at enterprise level. So then we started working with KPI and Sapiens to build this BDMS, which Gil described, which basically not only provides the governance and change management, but does all the requirements we had around the reuse, the export to IT, interfaces to IT, so build that comprehensive solutions with them. And it was put in production 2 months back, and we have only positive things to say about it. So that has been going great. So that's pretty much in the nutshell on my decision modeling experience.
Great. Thank you, Ravi. So then we'll move to the second question, which maybe can be summarized quickly because some people covered their motivations, but our second question we wanted them to share with you is what motivated each of you to pursue the decision model? What was the very first thing, the first time, the first project that you used the decision model for? What was your motivation? What did you see in it, and what problem did it solve that was most important to you? And we'll come back to Ravi first.
Okay, so so as I described earlier, we're looking for something which was easy for business to understand, easy for IT to implement, and then also it provides a rigor, which is the decision models methodology does that with the normalization principles. So those three were key things for us, and on top of that, we wanted to reuse all our existing rules. So when we looked at all the aspects, that's the reason we went for decision models. And another thing I would like to add to it is if you are basically managing 100, 200 business rules, then you should be able to choose any technologies. There's not going to be much difference. But if you're complex, if your rules numbers increases and gets into 1,000 or multiple, it's like, in our case, it's going to be close to 50,000 by next year. So you have to look at some comprehensive solution, and that's where the decision modeling helped us. And basically, we decided this is going to be the solution for Freddie Mac.
Great, thank you, Ravi. And we'll ask the same question of Gil because he came from it from a different perspective. Your primary motivation and interest in the decision model.
What really sold me on the decision model was an experience I had early on, actually, at Freddie Mac, early on in our project with them, when I walked into a room one day. It was what they call a validation session, and they had a mix of about 40 people in the room, a mix of business people, IT people, some senior management, and they were all looking at decision models, and everybody understood what was going on. Everybody was following along. They're presenting some stuff up on the projector, and they had printouts that they were looking at, graphical decision models, some rule families, and everybody could follow along and understand what was happening. And when a question arose, somebody would say, well, where did this come from, or whatnot? and they would quickly point to it, and everybody was able to understand the answer. So that, just that having that ease of understanding, excuse me, that ability to share the business logic in such a clear way across such different audiences really, really sold me. Which brings me to the next point, which is as a business rule vendor, all the vendors for years have been talking about business user empowerment. None of the vendors out there have ever really achieved or delivered on that goal of providing true 100% business user empowerment. The decision model does that, and that's my primary interest in it. As a vendor, it allows us to provide business users full empowerment and full control over their decision logic, and if they decide to implement it where deployment's enabled, they can actually control the decision logic all the way from, the business logic all the way from its motivation through to deployment and manage it full life cycle. IT does not need to be involved except in a very, very minor number of cases. So that's my motivation.
Great, thank you. And then Dave, what motivated you?
Yeah, what motivated me was, and I alluded to it on my introduction there, is that the getting beat up on projects where the business logic would get lost, or they would get lost, or it became untestable, where we needed the business people to be able to manage the business logic, and we weren't able to. And I'd summarize it was just the insanity of how we have always done projects in the past, and we've, including burying the business logic into the applications, and it gets lost, and we wonder, well, why did why does a particular application do what it's doing? And you have to go to an IT person. So I decided to pursue it because I just didn't want to do projects like that anymore. I didn't want that insanity. I wanted to cut all of that expense. I wanted to make it easy for the business to manage their business logic and easy for IT to implement it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. And then Nick, you have a totally different experience doing it from the bottom up and testing it in little pieces. What was your motivation?
I think for me, it can probably be summarized as effectively witnessing the light bulb moment. It's probably the way I would describe it. So what I mean by that is effectively putting the decision model in front of users, be they business, be they IT, and effectively just seeing it click with them. And it was a visible thing in my experience as well. And more often than not, that was sort of supported by people immediately asking questions. By that, I actually mean in terms of the details of the rules themselves. So in essence, their question was not, what is it that I'm looking at? It was, well, why does that particular rule have that particular condition in it? So effectively, it drove people to question it straight away. And it was that clarity around the requirements and effectively just that immediacy of response that really sort of sold it to me as, as something to really push with. And Gil mentioned sort of the appeal across different audiences, and for me it's the bridging of that IT and business gap more effectively. So the concepts appeal equally to both sets of audiences, so you're not just getting the clarity around business sign-off, but it's more easily understood by developers, but it keeps implementation specifics out of it as well. So for me, it's a perfect communication tool in that respect in terms of getting the greater clarity and greater, and at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the rules that, that you produce.
Well, thank you, Nick. I think we find that in our practice too, is there's sort of this line between business and IT seems to be sort of melting a little bit, and it's not that business and IT have the same roles, but that they're able to meet at the same point, and they can talk the same language, and yet they can each do their job. What the business people are good at coming up with what the rules should be and testing them and analyzing them, and IT is the best at automating them or selecting the technology, but there's a very thin line in between, so that's really good to hear. Our third question then is, can you provide insight into the sizes and complexities of your decision models? And in particular, how many rule families, those of you who are familiar with the decision model, the rule families are the two-dimensional structures that are tied together. If you have an idea of, from your smallest to your largest, and if you have any idea of number of rows, or the fact types, conditions, and conclusions. If you could share those with us so that the audience can see the very small ones to very large ones. And we'll start with David.
Yes, I'll start out with my largest one that I've ever done is a little over 450 rule families. However, I must say that inside of that, the rule families, the complexity of the rule families in that a decision model that size typically are pretty small. So while I had lots of rule families, the number of rows in fact types in each of the individual rule families was pretty small, anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4. Done lots of, so that would be a super large. In the large area, done decisions where we had 30 to 40 rule families, and inside of those the sizes ranged from rule families from a few fact types up to between 8 and 10. And then and those rule families that have between 8 and 10 typically get 40, 50 rows in them, individual rows. And then done lots of decisions where they were single rule family decisions, and a very small amount of logic from a few fact types and just a couple of rows. That's my summary.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And Gil, what about you?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I haven't had an opportunity to do much modeling per se. Having said that, I have done some recently, and starting with the smallest one, couple of rule families, maybe 3. Not that many rows, not that many columns, so that was pretty small. The largest one was about 50 rule families, about 120 fact types total. Row complexity, they were averaging, I'd say, somewhere between 5 to 7 rows for each of those rule families. So total about, 300 rows for the entire decision.
Okay, great. I know one of the challenges which now we have a solution for in the decision product, is when you get something, a very large decision model, is how do you print it, how do you look at it, and how do you navigate it on the screen. And I know that you folks at Sapiens have done a lot of work there so that you can produce what I forgot what they're called, but books of decision models with the index in the back to fact types, and you can navigate through large decision models that are multiple pages and actually see an overview of where you are in the model. So I know while you haven't created some very huge ones, Gil, you've certainly seen them, and you've certainly dealt with having to deliver them in a way that they're readable for business people and IT people. With that, we'll move on to Ravi, and about, Ravi, your size and complexity of decision models you've done in the last few years.
So we have, in the current project, where what I mentioned earlier is that we have 50 or so decision models and roughly 400, 500 decision views, and I would say 2,000 to 3,000 rule families with approximately 20,000 rows. So that's the scale and complexity we have. For us, it's most of the reuse comes from the rule family views and decision views. So as I described earlier, based on the customers or based on the programs, based on the guide, the policy requirement, we have several variations of the same term, and that leads us, that results in a lot of reuse, but more decision views and more rule family views. So that's pretty much at high level what complexity we have. And also the largest decision model, decision view is approximately 400 or so rule families. I'm not sure David was describing this one or something else, but overall, yeah. So we have from very simple, where we have just one rule family in a decision view, to 400 rule families in a decision view.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ravi. And several people have mentioned views, and I think that's a productivity boost that some of the folks who might be listening in are not familiar with. But if some organizations are dealing with business rules as in single decision tables or decision trees, and you don't have the concept of a view of an entire model. So when you have a decision model that, let's say, one decision model might have 50 rule families, and you create it for, let's say, the United States, and you wanted to create the same decision model for another country, you have the option with views of reusing pieces of the original model and adding or changing the pieces that you need to customize. And so what that means productivity-wise is you actually can deliver views quickly when they're built off of other models or off of other views. And sort of like in the relational world where you're able to mix and match tables together without copying and pasting what's underneath. And so I just wanted to mention that clarity, because you can have a lot of decision views, but it doesn't mean that it took you, 100 times more to create them. It may actually take you very little time to create new views. With that, we move on to Nick. And Nick, can you tell us about the sizes and complexities of your decision models? With the
my numbers are probably going to pale into insignificance in comparison to the other guys. But I would say so the first project that I talked about, you were talking about one process that encompassed a total of 14 rule families. So that was the decision rule families in addition to their supporting rule families. And that comprised a total of about 40 fact types, either as conditions, conclusions, or operands. So relatively small scale, as I say, in comparison to the other guys, but I would probably say in comparison to the number of natural language rules there might have been, I would say there was probably more in terms of, and that was basically to aid the clarity. So that's about the size of my experience.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do find in organizations that are just getting started, people sometimes sit in cafeterias or at tables and they're drawing their rule families or small decision models on napkins and discussing things. And that's always a first good beginning, because as soon as people, some of them come to the IIBA meetings with envelopes that have some of their rule families on them and start talking about them. And we actually have, there's one university we know of out on the West Coast that actually does decision models as part of their curriculum, their master's certificate program for business analysts, and they actually use a MasterCard mandate as their example, and they have students create a decision model for that mandate, which is really only 1 to 3 decision rule family. So it's once you really understand how to do a little one, you can do a larger one. But that in mind, we move on to our fourth question, which is in
Barbara?
what technology? Yes.
Barbara, this is Dave. Can I just add one more thought there?
Sure.
We found from experience in different industries that the size and complexity of models varies by industry. For example, in the insurance industry, we tend to find a large number of decisions, but they're much smaller. Whereas in the financial industry, we find that there's fewer numbers of decisions, but the decision models are much larger. So it really varies from industry to industry.
I think that's actually really interesting, because without the decision model, you wouldn't really have an understanding for how the logic of one industry to another really varies. So it's sort of, just visually being able to see that, you get a sort of a view of the complexity of the decisions that the particular industry makes, and possibly also reflecting all the regulations in some of those industries too. So thank you, Dave. Our fourth question now is about technology. People say, what do I do with my decision models when I'm finished with them? Are they just for requirements people, and do they get thrown away? Do we maintain them? How easy are they to implement? And again, this experience is all over the map. We are proud to say that we said that decision model is technology independent, and here it is several years later, and it truly is technology independent, because we have worked with decision models in different organizations, and they have implemented them in various technologies and in using them as input. And in some places that automation is much smoother, depending on how close the technology matches the concepts of the decision model. And with that, let me ask about technologies. So I'll start with Nick. Did we lose Nick?
Sorry, no, my audio dropped out. Apologies for that.
Oh, sorry.
Right, yes, in terms of the automation of the decision models, my projects so far have dealt with a lot of legacy systems. So the rules themselves have not been implemented, I suppose, in a traditional BDMS, as some people will be familiar with, but effectively those requirements that were articulated in a decision model have then been built in COBOL, for example. So as I say, it's not automated, but there's certainly still the persistency of the artifact. In other areas of the business, I would anticipate there being greater use of automation, and that will come as I know they use certain business rules engines elsewhere in the organisation. So, assuming it were to spread wider, I could definitely see there being more automated decision models in use.
Great, thank you, Nick. And David, what have you seen?
Yes, my experience, I started out with where we took the models and just handed them to programmers and they hard-coded it right into the application. And our experience with that, my experience with that is that it cut the amount of time it took for the coders to code it, it cut their time about right in half. Then I went from that to we automated some of the we automated the decision models. In other words, we were putting them in Visio and Excel, and we could take the Excel files and read them right in, and it was a homegrown program, and it would read it right in, and it had a little homegrown rules engine in it, and run them right then and there, including testing them, by the way, testing the decision models. From there to Blaze and iLog are other technologies that I've had experience with models being implemented in. But I'd also point out too is that the testing, not only do we dramatically, even simple, very simple by hard coding the decision model into an application, we get significant improvements in productivity, but also in the testing. It's dramatic. And we went from I've seen projects where it would have taken days to weeks, if not longer, to test an application, the logic in an application, to down to we could run those tests in minutes by using the decision model.
Great, thank you, Dave. And Gil.
Yes, I'll address my answer towards what we support with the decision product, first of all, and then I'd like to comment a few things on what the earlier panelists have mentioned. So first of all, in terms of what we support decision, we can deploy to, of course, our own internal engine, which we call eMerge, so our own internal rules engine. We can deploy to other rules engines through a deployment adapter. To date, we've deployed to iLog and rules, and we will support others as we go forward. One common misconception about deploying the decision model to various rules engines is that you need inferencing, that you need reading. In fact, that is not true, and all of the inferencing is actually taken care of at modeling time by the model itself, and the runtime environment does not need any inferencing capabilities. So with that in mind, you can actually deploy, as we said, it's technology independent. You can deploy the decision model to any technology, any rules engine. I will claim, and this is where I'm commenting on what David said, I will claim that in order to really support rapidly evolving markets and market conditions and changing ecosystems and so on, we need, or businesses need, high velocity of change, at least in some markets. One customer we're working with changed their production business rules every day. So obviously you can't do that with a manual deployment or deployment to a hard-coded system. You need the ability to change things in your decision models, test them that same day, and deploy them that same day to your live environment. And for that, you need an automated deployment type scenario, and we provide that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gil. I just want to mention, too, that we have heard from some of our clients that it's sometimes useful for them to turn the READY algorithm off in the engine, that the decision model really actually performs quite well or better without the READY algorithm. So I'm sure there'll be more about that in the future. But the nice thing about the comments before I turn over to Ravi is that the decision model truly is technology independent. It stands alone as its own deliverable, but more and more as technology evolves and decision supports some of these things, that line will get blurrier and blurrier, and you'll be able to hopefully unplug one engine and put in another one for the same decision model. That's sort of the holy grail of where we'd like to go. And Ravi, can you talk to technologies in your organization and your decision models?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So technologies is basically, there is one gap right now. There is not a standard interface to transfer business rules or the decision models to IT. And what we have done is we have looked at the decision models and decision views and created an interface. And that interface is our IT is able to consume it using that interface. And on our IT side, we use iLog. We also use the EUC. It's end-user computing. It's a homegrown rule engine. And so basically we have done some workaround on it, and we have optimized that process. So once the decision models is created are ready by business, then they get exported in a specific format. And BDMS, the decision system which Gil was mentioning, is able to do that. So it creates that standard sort of documents, and then IT can simply import those directly into the iLog. So there is not a manual coding, so it's comparatively automated process. But I would say on this side that there is still some way to go, because there is a need to have a standard interface where we can deploy across the systems. And decision model by nature is technology independent, but as an industry, we need to define an interface which can help us in exchanging decision models and passing it to IT.
Okay, great. Well, we have a lot of things to look forward to, it sounds like, and I think the audiences maybe can understand that we have decision models deployed in legacy technology, new technology, and some organizations looking to even improve the new technology and the interfaces. And so we have about 10 minutes left, and that leaves us with one question. So I'd like to go through the panelists one more time and ask each of them to share with you, the audience, the one most important lesson that they learned that they would like you to know. And so starting with Gil.
So the one important lesson I would like to pass along is that while organizations frequently start using the decision model with Excel and Visio, and that might work for a small-scale project, it doesn't really scale. The Excel and Visio very quickly get out of sync with each other, and you really need to manage your decision models in a single repository, single integrated repository. So use Decision.
Thank you, Gil. And the one lesson learned from Ravi?
Lesson learned. So it's very easy to basically read the business requirement or go over the policies and start modeling. But that may lead to some things which it may be a perfect solution for you or maybe not. There is a need to do some upfront analysis and define the architecture and decision modeling. There is a piece on where you identify decisions in the process. I would say that is the most important thing. First is you have to go in and define where those decisions are going to execute, understand the overall process implications before you do any modeling.
That's excellent, because we haven't covered process modeling at all in this webinar, but we usually always start with a process context, and particularly with a decision-aware process, because if you have an old process model that doesn't recognize decisions, it's usually most often the best thing to do is to throw it away and start all over again, because your process models become a lot simpler. but then you also understand all the context and all the data and everything that you need to have prior to that decision model.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ravi. And the one lesson learned from David?
Oh, yes. I find this a bit of an unfair question because I've learned so many lessons. But the one I would pass on to the audience today is that after my first experience with the decision model and the lights just turned, the lights turned on not only for me but for my analysts and for IT, I realized that businesses are paying a tax, and they don't even realize it, because the decision model brings such productivity. It reduces the cost of doing business so much. It creates such a great agile environment where a business can be more competitive. That businesses, we became accustomed to it in the old ways that we used to do things, that it just costs that much. But the reality is that we've all paid a tax, and businesses all paid a tax in order to design, implement, and maintain their business logic. And once I learned this and I went around, I just realized it just was this big light going off everywhere I turned. And even on my clients now, when I go into a client, is the amount of money and cost, the money that's being wasted and resources because they don't have the decision model is very, very high.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I know you've done some articles. You guys should keep your eyes out for some Dave Peterson articles, because oftentimes he shares ROI and agility and cost benefits in some of the projects he's worked on. And we always say that's an important part of a decision model project, is to keep track of how long it takes you to do things, so you can compare it to the old way, or you can get better and better at it, or each project is different depending on the complexity of the logic and depending on the source that the logic is coming from. So that's a good lesson learned from David. And we end up with Nick as his most important lesson so far.
It's quite easy to get caught up in in all the various principles of the model itself, and I think for me the big thing is a lot of the time this will come down to people change, and it's about getting the people engaged and excited about it, and really getting them involved with basically completing the models, and effectively it goes back to what I was saying at the start around self-sustaining. Can people still hear me? I've just had a note saying my audio connection's been lost.
No, I hear you fine. I can hear you.
You can still hear me?
Yes, yes. You're coming across fine.
Sorry. So yeah, it's about getting the right people involved. So I would basically it's about understanding what challenges you're all.
Yeah, I think we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Nick sent me a.
What the needs are of your business in order to actually get people engaged with using it.
Great, thank you. And so I really want to thank all the panelists. I hope they gave you a broad range of experiences. I'm hoping that each one of them will submit an article or co-author an article for a modern analyst about their experience if they haven't done so already. And I'll turn it over to Michael Gross.
Thank you, Barbara. It was very interesting to hear from practitioners what is their experience in the day-to-day operation. And I hope we will have next year another panel with additional clients. And I just want to give you an overview about how to get there. You see a slide with our engagement model. It just shows how we operate at KPI. Our focus is on the skills and the knowledge transfer, make you independent. The way how we do that is we typically embark on a pilot project. And a pilot project gives you an opportunity to see how the decision model actually works. The client would be more in a listen and learn mode at that point and will see with his own data how the decision model will impact process modeling, managing of business logic, and also data. One of the deliverables of the pilot project would be to define a target project that could have multiple increments. All those increments are fixed priced and time boxed so that the exposure of the client is limited to this increment, which is very, very helpful, and it also showed that it is very successful. During the target project, the clients would have an opportunity to participate at our certification program and become a decision model practitioner. There are a number of practitioners out there in the marketplace, and Ravi, you want to comment on that because you have been one of the early adopters in that field. Would you like to share quickly your experience with the certification process?
Yeah, it has been a great experience with the certification process because now we have also placed some more rigor on it. As Barbara described and Michael went through it, is basically there are steps to get certification. So we consider, we treat certification, the certified analyst very high, and only people who are certified can do certain things, like they can lead assignment or peer review, which peer review the other analysts work. So the experience has been great. It goes through the, it's a long process though, so it takes analysts somewhere down from 6 months to 1 year. So you have to give them time, and basically once they are up to speed and get through the certification, they become a very valuable asset to the company.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And at the end of the target project, there is an option to continue with StepMent, which is basically a mentoring program where we have our team remote supporting the client's team, basically as an insurance for new projects that are used that are using the decision model. Now, and of course, if you look at the engagement model, it is embedded typically also in the new technology that is brought by Sapiens. We find it's a perfect fit to the decision model, and with that, I would like to pass it quickly to Gil. Gil, a few words about decision.
Thank you, Mike. So we've mentioned decision several times during this webinar. Decision, of course, is our enterprise-level business decision management system. It's designed to support the decision model both from a modeling perspective and from a management perspective, and by that I mean the ability to manage decisions, to manage a life cycle of decisions from cradle to grave, including their deployment. If you'd like to read more about or learn more about decision, please go to our website, which you see on the slide, sapiensdecision.com, and you'll have contact information on the next slide as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Gil. Now, there are many ways to learn more about the decision model. Barbara, you would like to expand on that?
Well, I could lead people through the slide here. The most important is to visit our website, www.kpiusa.com. We have a free primer on the decision model, which is sort of like a precursor to the book. So you might want to read the primer first and then the book second if you haven't already read the book. And we have white papers out there on different advances as we work on the decision model. But I think most important is to become a member of the LinkedIn group called the Decision Model, because that's, you'll find people, if you're new to it, be asking questions, and some of the questions are being answered by experienced people in the decision model. So it's a place where people just come and meet, and in fact that's how we met some of the panelists here and other speakers. So that's a really good place to go to see what's going on, and follow our articles in Modern Analyst, I guess. One thing I'll mention that's at the bottom, we do have for free Microsoft Visio templates and Microsoft Excel templates, the Visio for the decision model diagram and the Excel templates for the rule families. So for those of you who are reading the book or went to an IIBA session or attended a webinar and want to go back to your office and try your hand at decision modeling, please log on to our website and download these, because you'll be able to produce, you know, nice quality looking models to show people and to play with. And that's it, Michael. Turn it back to you.
Thank you, Barbara. This also brings us to the end of our presentation and the end of our small webinar series. Thank you so much for attending. I see we are finishing in time. Unfortunately, there's not time left for you to ask a lot of questions. If you have some, please send them to us. We will distribute them to the panelists and send you a response. We hope to see you soon at our upcoming webinars next year. Visit our webpage, and we wish you a wonderful holiday season and look forward to seeing you and hearing from you next year. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists as well. This concludes the presentation for today.